All right, we'll call to order the regularly scheduled meeting, April 6th, for the zoning commission town of Simsbury. We have an overwhelming attendance by the commission members today. That's very nice. We don't need any alternates, correct?
Correct.
Well, no, we need somebody for Jerry, I guess. Yeah. So Ned, why don't you sit in for Jerry, okay?
Sorry.
All right, so you get that, Ned, for Jerry? All right, approval of minutes of March 16th. I looked at them, I thought they were fine. Any questions?
Nope.
So we'll adopt the minutes as presented. So agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action on any agenda item, including application number 15-06 of Robin Messier Pearson Esquire for K&K Developers, Inc., agent, Infinity 4 LLC owners, for a site plan amendment on property located at 34 Hot Meadow Street, zone PAD. All right.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, members of the audience. My name is Robin Pearson. I'm an attorney with the firm of Alter & Pearson in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and I'm pleased to be here before you this evening, which we hope will be the culmination of many months of work with regard to the development of this particular parcel in the context of the overall PAD approval for 34 Hot Street. With me this evening, I'd like to introduce a couple of people. You certainly know them because you've seen us here before. Excuse me, Eli Pechtold is here, the applicant. Chris Ferrero is going to be speaking in a minute. Mark Bertucci, our traffic engineer, is here from Fussin O'Neill in case there are any issues. I'm not sure how detailed we need to get tonight with regard to traffic. TJ Donahue is here with Mark Greenberg on behalf of the owner of the entire PAD site. Before we begin, I think we all would like to express our gratitude to town staff, particularly Hiram Peck, in working with us through this process, which has been very complex given the many agencies we've had to go to get to this particular point this evening. And we are very grateful that Simsbury is a community, not only in regard to its professional staff, but also boards and commissions that we've been before through this process have been willing to work with us to set out a schedule that would keep us on schedule, particularly given the harsh winter we had this year where a number of meetings seemed to get canceled at inopportune times for us. So we appreciate that very much. At this point, I just want to remind you, in August 2014, we began the process with filing the PAD application and zone change. In September of that year, we've got the Conservation Commission recommendations of approval, as well as a permit to conduct a regulated activity to allow that boulevard entry road crossing over a wetland area. Design review and planning boards also opined favorably on the PAD application for the mixed-use development for this overall PAD site. On November 17th, this board of last year granted the PAD approval and the rezoning for the property, sending us back to, at that point, beginning to work very assiduously on the particular development aspects for site plan application for what is now known as Lot 1B for the residential development on behalf of Garden Homes. We needed to, before we could get here tonight, to go through filing of a site plan application, another inland wetland application before the Conservation Commission, because we changed some aspects of that roadway crossing and had at that point further engineered the site so we understood stormwater implications better, came up with a better plan, went back to the Conservation Commission, and they approved on March 17th of this year both a favorable review of the subdivision plan, which was another application that we had to go through, and also granted another, if you will, inland wetland permit for the work that we're proposing with regard to the site plan information you're going to see this evening. I'd like to leave with you, if you do not have it in the record already, a copy of the minutes of the Inland Wetland Agency meeting of March, which is a thorough report in favor of what we are proposing to do by virtue of the approval of the regular permit activity and the favorable recommendation on the subdivision. We went to the Planning Commission again, not with regard to the site plan, because they don't have jurisdiction over it, but with regard to the subdivision application, for which they do have total jurisdiction. On March 10th, they basically said everything looked good, but they needed the Wetlands Agent, the Conservation Commission report. So once we got our favorable decision from Conservation, they were able to approve the subdivision on March 24th. We've also received, as of March 16th, favorable Design Review Board review. And that brings us to tonight. I believe, and before I turn it over to Mr. Ferraro, it's fair to say that we've addressed all of the staff comments. There were issues dealing with how the bike path might be confirmed with regard to its location and easements that might be required, with regard to sewer capacity and potential change for sewer location. All of that has been reviewed, and at this point, the WPCA staff is very comfortable with our capacity numbers. Any other comments that staff had, I believe we've answered with regard to traffic, when the signalization will occur, and we have provided counsel for the town of Simsbury as well as staff with the proposed deed restrictions, which, as you will recall, you requested that we provide 18 set-aside units that would be affordable at 80% of median income in this development as it's built out. And we have prepared that deed language. We've provided sample calculations of how that rent restriction would work, and that is currently before the town council to take a look at it and make sure it's accurate, and I assume there'll be no issues with regard to that, so we've done that. So at this point, why don't we get into the specifics of the site plan layout application, and Chris will go into in more detail the responsive changes that we have made to address comments of all the boards and staff. Chris?
Thanks, Robin.
Can you give me the last name?
Ferrero, F-E-R-R-E-R-O. So this is somewhat of a success story, I think. You know, it's the way the PAD application is supposed to work. What I have here is, this is what you approved as part of the zone change. And I think of particular note, of course, you know, as part of that zone change application, we said right from the get-go that this was the first piece that was going to be built. The process here is that we come in with a level of detail, with a level of engineering, and, you know, to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, we did a reasonably good job first time around, to the extent that there's almost no changes here. The changes are in the form of modifying some parking locations. They're widening turning radiuses based on the discussions with the fire marshal. There's really very, very little that is substantively changed in terms of the layout of all of this. I would consider all this sort of tweaks. Attorney Pearson went through all of our agencies that we've been through. We've obviously been through them all again. All first shot, all very short meetings. Again, it was sort of like presenting the PAD zone change again, although a much more brief situation. Now, the one thing that, frankly, you know, stuck in my craw a little bit as we moved through the zone change part of this is that visual analysis. And we had, you know, for the record, I stated at that time, you know, this is based on USGS mapping. It might not be right. I did my due diligence with all the disclaimers the consultant needs to use. But we felt like we really had to try to prove this out a little bit more, which we did. And I'm somewhat pleased to suggest that what we did in 2 feet of snow, not me, I sent people out there. But basically, we know exactly where the peak of this roof is gonna be, and these condominiums or these townhouses are right here. We know exactly where that peak is gonna be. We measured in the field to exactly where it is. We simply squatted down on Hot Meadow Street with a camera to the height of a driver's eye and snapped a picture of basically a 10-foot pole. And once you do that, you can extrapolate that pole and get a sense of how tall this is. And this is really, frankly, what we were trying to achieve as part of that pad application. And this sort of analysis proves it out. Now, obviously, and don't think that the entire frontage is this. There's a lot of gaps and holes, but the buildings that are there, the intent of what we were trying to do was to keep this icon instilled.
Bring up the previous one just and show me what elevation we're looking at.
You're looking at the peaks of
So what
this
about the
roof.
buildings in front of it?
Now, these are 2.5-story buildings. So this is the law of perspective. When we presented these buildings are 1-story buildings.
Okay,
They were
so-
limited to 1 story, so it's this sort of cone of vision idea. I would expect or suspect that depending on the final placement, the final architecture of this, that my hope would be you'd see almost the same amount because of, again, that cone of vision. We've got a 1-story and then a 2.5-story behind it. So that's really, there's nothing substantive to talk about with respect to the plan itself. So this is today's site plan, tweaks in parking, tweaks in the location of the garages, and we may actually keep tweaking that a little bit. We've defined and begun to design the clubhouse area, the swimming pool a little bit more. The fire marshal had a lot to say about the roundabout, had a lot to say about getting around the site, and we've literally made all of these modifications at this point. I'd like to go into just a few things that have been talked about with staff over the last week or so. Robin touched on, the first one is WPCA. We had a number of conversations with both WPCA and the Director of Public Works over the last couple of days, and fundamentally, there's really not an issue here. We had originally proposed a pump station down on this corner. That pump station was going to pump sewage back up to Hot Meadow Street, which flows back into Avon, which flows back into Simsbury, into the WPCA facility. Well, the WPCA enlightened us to the fact that they have a major trunk line on the east side of the trail. And the light bulb went off. We said, why can't we just tie into that? Which they said, well, you can. So we're going to need an encroachment permit for the from the Department of Transportation to jack underneath that trail. But the bottom line is that's an easy connection that gets rid of a pump station. So that's the no-brainer. The second became an issue of allocation. So there's about 195,000 gallons allocated to the entire 60-acre parcel, and frankly, that's what WPCA is interested in. They're not necessarily interested in how you divvy it up. They're interested in that entire parcel has, or meets, does not exceed that allocation. Now, the Garden Homes residential component of that is 50,000 and change, something like that. The discussion with WPCA had not to do with how we distribute that allocation, but rather to notify future property owners of undeveloped property that there was limitations on the allocations that were remaining. Now, we haven't done the calculations, but I know what uses I think might be going there, and I don't see anywhere near as intense to suck up 195 gallons, which of course is a usage and an allocation predicated on an industrial land use, which of course we don't have anymore. So I think we're through the majority of the issues with the WPCA. Now, with respect to sewage, since we're talking about sewage, we would require easements. So if we get rid of the pump station here, the likelihood that these two parcels of land would want to tie into that same system is obvious. So at the end of the day, the lawyers will draw up the easements, the cross easements associated with providing these two properties with access to that sanitary discharge point, and all those calculations would then be sort of forwarded to WPCA for their review. The bike trail. So as part of the zone change application, our testimony included that primarily you have a bike trail connection, but you may not have it on this first piece of residential property, that maybe in the future when future development of other properties came about. clearly, I think, clearly there was a desire, I'd say, to have that bike trail built sooner than later. In the first place, the town's bike master plan dumps you out at Blue Ridge. It's a perfect connection. As a planner, it's a dream connection. Simsbury's bike friendly. I mean, all this adds up. So in order to accommodate that, fundamentally, this blue line is what we're proposing to commit to as that bike trail. And that commitment is basically constructed and operational at the point of Garden Home's first certificate of occupancy. So by the time this thing is beginning to be built, you will have that connection from the end of Blue Ridge all the way down. Now, we're in the process. We've submitted the applications to DOT, bike trails owned by the Department of Transportation. We also need encroachment permits there. By all our correspondence with them, is pretty much a no-brainer. It's a foregone conclusion to some extent. I can't say foregone conclusion, but it's looking very, very good that will be granted and that you will in fact have that bike trail.
And Chris, if I could just add one thing, and that is, of course, if we can't get it,
Right.
you know, it's entirely up to DOT, but we're committed to doing it, and assuming DOT is okay, and with Hiram pushing them, I'm sure they will be.
Right.
This all assumes that DOT is going to authorize it.
So the bike trail comes with some caveats probably, and the caveat is really liability. So inevitably, again, the attorneys will work, the landowner will want to have some relief probably of liability of public use. That will be submitted to town staff. Corporate counsel will be reviewing those documents, but again, this is not rocket science. It's pretty easy stuff, and at the end of the day, it'll happen. Another issue with the bike trail is that this pretty much goes in immediately. We know that CLMP may be vacating. We don't know the future of that piece of land, but we would like to reserve the right to relocate that bike trail if needed. So we're still committing to the connection, but if that connection for some reason, and frankly I don't see why it would have to change, but if it did, there are multiple other places, as I presented as part of the zone change, that could happen.
What is it along now? What is there already a drive there that
Yeah,
it's going along?
basically CLMP driveway.
Driveway.
So the idea is that this is non-functioning by the time they get there, almost. The timing is very interesting. The relationship of that exodus and the completion of construction to the extent that they're applying for TCOs or COs. So basically, you got a driveway that's not being used. And we would have to construct this piece from the end of their existing driveway to the bike trail. We'd have to connect to the bike trail physically. And we'd have to build along Hot Meadow Street within this conservation easement that you'll see and that we're offering, up to Blue Ridge. Now, until such time as, well, let me state traffic for a second here. As you probably know, our initial zone change application had a full traffic report on the whole 60 acres. But it fundamentally said that this residential component alone doesn't trigger the signal, does not trigger the signal. And we submitted as part of this application a traffic report specifically for the Garden Homes component. It was consistent right through and through with the original one. Also says don't need a signal. You won't get the signal until the next one of these two properties becomes developed. So how that relates to bikes, crosswalks. So they may be crossing a street either with a mid-block crosswalk that is unsignalized or no crosswalk, depending on whether DOT allows it to happen or not without a signal. So this entire project is in front of OSTA right now for determination of basically whether it needs a certificate or not, and the only reason it would need a certificate would be if the OSTA review process yielded the necessity to have like a turning lane. Once you touch the state road, you're into that certificate process. We're hoping obviously that we don't have to do that. But in any case, it will not require any lights.
Why are you only going to Blue Ridge? Why not down to the town line?
Because the bike trail master plan for the town of Simsbury has it coming out right here.
Is that that's something?
We have a sidewalk.
Something that exists, or it's something in someone's mind?
Is it in someone's mind, Hiram, or it exists?
Well, it exists. The Director of Public Works actually put that together, and that shows that route as part of the plan currently.
By the Plain Ridge?
Yeah,
Up Blue Ridge.
yes. Up and down, yep, that connection.
So along with the bike connection. As you might expect in a mixed-use development like this, which is what the pad is all about, you're sharing a lot of things, especially access. And when you share things, there's lots and lots of easements. There's cross easements, there's right to pass easements, there's grading easements, there's liability easements. There's all kinds of easements. To typify maybe just a couple of those, one of which I said we're gonna have to do when we build garden homes because we're gonna provide sanitary back through our site to this, that requires an easement. In the future though, it makes an awful lot of sense when this property is developed to begin to look at Riverdale Farms and say, that's a really smart thing to do to help relieve some congestion on Hot Meadow Street. You create the internal circulation systems between all of the land uses, regardless of town lines. These kinds of right-to-pass easements would be something that would be suggested, strongly recommended as part of the future development of a system like that. The fact that Garden Homes actually owns this boulevard, we're going to have to give rights to the access to these various components to the current landowner and obviously the future development entities. So there's a number of kind of easements and cross easements. I don't know that you guys want to get into the detail of that. We can, but usually this is the fodder of corporate counsel and kind of working through the issues there. So
Who owns the roads on the Avon side?
This?
Yeah,
I-
because their willingness to work with us
Yeah.
would not just be a legal issue.
they do have a willingness to work with us, I believe. Yeah, yeah. So, again, hearkening back to the zone change application, a lot, of course, is made about this preservation area. This preservation area was established as part of our viewshed analysis for the sole purpose of obviously seeing that mountain in the distance. The Plan of Conservation and Development goes into a great deal about A, those views, and B, the idea that there's preservation of a certain amount, a big amount, frankly, of pure open space at the front door of Hot Meadow Street, this sort of pastoral gateway sort of concept. So, again, nothing's changed from our original master plan, and I think now it's time for commitments, so we're offering up that easement, a draft of which I think has been submitted to the town for review. And it's basically a conservation easement of not less than 100 feet along all of the entire stretch of Hot Meadow Street in this area here. So there's, parcel A is on this parcel. Parcel B covers basically CL&P parcel up to what would be a future entrance, and then parcel C is the small sliver that's left over before the office park. Lastly, I believe, I can pass these out. I'm not sure, if you can pass those down, great. There was some discussion at design review and further discussion followed up by Hiram and Rachel with respect to, we're going to see until such time as this future piece is developed, you're going to see the garage doors of these townhouses. Frankly, they're pretty attractive townhouses. However, there was some recommendations that maybe in the interim we should buffer these garage doors from Hot Meadow Street. So what you're seeing is basically a landscape plan that proposes small trees being operative so we don't disrupt that visual, no 70-foot oaks, and a series of very tall grasses, miscanthus or something that'll grow very tall and be attractive. Also has that sort of rare feel to it. So I have to say, this is a textbook project with respect to your pad application process, and we're relatively proud that we were able to preserve the integrity of the design as we originally proposed it.
All right, thank you. So I think, Hiram, should we, first of all, there are questions from Mr. Ferraro relative to the changes that we've seen, David?
Are these native? You know, we got all of that issue.
We went through your Conservation Commission, sir.
Well, it says Miscanthus sinensis. That sounds like a Chinese.
It sounds Latin. That's what it sounds like, Latin.
Sina sounds, anyway. Fine.
Nice. How about bamboo? No, that would be bad.
No, it would be bad.
No, we won't do that.
Have you had new discussions with CL&P at all about the site?
We have not.
Okay.
I know things have changed since you first came through. Now that they're vacating the site, how does that change everything? Has anybody talked to CLMP?
I'm sure that some people in the room have. But I have not talked directly to them myself. I don't know whether anybody else has anything to offer on that.
I mean, certainly it would change the entire scape of the project.
Well,
Not really.
Well,
if
if you were able to,
You have an approval that locks you into a character, a scale, and a density. And anything beyond that comes back to you. So,
oh, I agree with that. I'm just saying, if you were able to encompass a critical mass, it might just, I mean, it could just change the whole thing. You know, and I'm not suggesting that. I like what's in front of us. I'm just curious if there have been conversations with the owner of the real estate that's right in the middle of your project.
I'm the owner.
But he's the owner, they're lessee.
So you own that
Owns the
CLMP?
property.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, they're a lessee.
They're moving the end of May.
Okay, I thought that they own their own property.
No.
So how does that change your view of the entire
Can I
project?
ask for his name and?
Yeah.
Mark Greenberg, M-A-R-K, Greenberg.
TJ Donahue, representing Mark Greenberg, Infinity 4 LLC. We've had continuing dialogue with CLMP. Their position seems to be set in stone, even though we've discussed and tried to keep them to stay there for a while. And we're totally committed to the plan as laid, and we always contemplated that at some time they would leave. We thought it would be 10 years out, so now that they're leaving earlier, we will do some redesign, we will be consulting with the town, and we might change that, but it will fall within the scope and scale of this plan that you've approved, and you will have full design review and full site plan approval of it.
Was it the
part
case?
It's part of the PID.
I understand. So, but wasn't it the case that when this project first came to us, that they had just renewed a lease?
Yes, they had.
Okay. And so
They had a
we all
five,
assumed that they
took
were
a
going to
five,
be there for the long term, or at least for 5 years.
so do we.
Right. But now that's changed.
It's changed, and they've changed.
Coincidentally, well, I mean, I don't know. Are there any thoughts or plans in the works for what might happen there currently?
No, there's nothing in the works right now, but we're gonna do something with it. You know, they've been through a massive corporate change. I mean, they've
Yeah.
been through merger and acquisition, everything else. They've had a lot of different
Yeah.
changes in a lot of different communities.
Mhm.
We were surprised.
Okay.
For your own information, their lease goes through December 17, 2016.
Okay.
They will be vacating the end of May, but they will be paying rent through December 17, 2016.
Yeah, or just buying out their lease. Right. Okay, thank you.
Kevin.
Sharon? Yeah, I had a question about, you kind of laid low on the change to the garages.
the change?
Yeah, well, yeah, they weren't 9 in a row when we first saw this.
Which garage is you talking
Another
about?
one on the south side,
On the Avon line.
yeah.
Yeah, we actually recommended that they relocate those to make the internal, correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about that in terms of the north and the south, actually, Kevin, to try to make the internal portion of the site more walkable and more pedestrian friendly, as opposed to having cars throughout. That was one of the original, that was quite a while ago, we started on that.
Right, but it's kind of a wall now.
Well,
It's walls in the whole community. And is there any room
I
for a
think the
little
graphic,
bit of spacing
the
between?
graphic is a little bit of a misnomer. We're looking at splitting these into like 4 and 5 gang garages separate with like a trellis. So what you might be seeing here is a break in that garage. Now, I'll tell you another thing that Hiram is going to see within a few weeks, is we're going to look to actually relocate some of these garages, and we're going to look to relocate them to basically engulf this green space. And when you do that, now the backs of the garages are equally important as the front of the garages from an aesthetic and architectural standpoint. And we're doing that for a whole bunch of reasons. One is, it basically, the people that have a garage space, and it's not all of them, they'll pay a premium for that garage space. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have that space the farthest away from the unit. It makes a certain amount of sense to have that close. By the same token, it begins to look at building wall here, and everything behind building wall is parking and pavement, so that it begins to enclose both of these courtyards on both sides. So that's probably not something you all would be interested in, but in that case, we have to provide more breaks in the garages because people have to get through those garages to basically access their units.
Okay, so what we're seeing now, I'm not sure, are we approving
Well, that would be a
wall?
site, that would be a site plan.
But we're approving it with
Right.
the 9 bays in a row, or actually 36 garages in a row is the way that that plan calls for it.
Eli, do these garages have brakes?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
So each one of these is a brake. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4.
It was a break between them, it looked like a storage unit, there was a door.
Part of them have brake, part of them don't have brake, but we can do all of them with brakes.
I guess all I'm saying, I think there should be some breaks so that it's not 36 units in a row.
Let me take you to task on that a little bit. So if you put 5 feet or 4 feet between a bank of garages, and you got 30 garages and you have 5 feet every set of 5, is that substantively, architecturally, socially different than not having the brake?
Well, I prefer a little more than 5 feet, but that's not what I was asking for. I was asking for more of a break. Well, on the other side, at least you have a drive. I mean, I don't think you want to see, that is a very long building, 36 garages in a row. I mean, it's bigger than any other building you have.
Coming back.
Can you break them up somehow instead of doing a space in between each one? Cluster a little bit, maybe?
Could it just two things for the, one is, design review looked at this same plan. That didn't come up there. The other thing is that it may look odd with this particular sketch, but this set of buildings over here walls off this parking lot and it's
That's
pretty
a buffer.
unattractive.
Yeah, but there are breaks in that one. You have a drive in there.
And over here, what this really is again, a parking area for medical buildings. It's not residences. So that was some of the thought that went into it as well. Both of these things here, at least initially, and certainly could change, design could change, but at least initially, that was what the thinking was there, was to give it some protection and to actually provide some.
So these garages are basically the same, with the only difference of the brakes, the couple of brakes because of a dumpster pad on a roadway. But they're basically the same functional building. But if we're going to contemplate coming back to Hiram anyway, with the changes that I mentioned, we can certainly look at maybe spreading them apart a little bit more.
I mean, you don't intend in the future to have that as an access point. Obviously, you wouldn't
No.
reduce your ability to
No.
anywhere along that.
No, you would
Yeah,
never
it would
access.
be further to
You'd
the
access the
front.
commercial pieces, right?
Because it looks like they planned on the Avon side, they have a dead end there.
Yeah, they're mistaken.
Yeah, okay.
This was originally zoned industrial, as you know, so.
That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Turning our backside on the Avon.
There we are, we're building a wall on the Avon side there.
Well, we're not. I would venture to disagree. So on the Avon side, you have a very large commercial piece of land on the eastern part of that site, or actually it's the entire part of that site. We're building a residential portion, which doesn't necessarily play nice with that neighbor, but we're also building a commercial portion, which really gives that kind of consistency that could on Meadow Street.
From the south side, looking at our garages, is there any landscaping
Yeah, a
along
lot of
there?
landscaping, a lot of pine trees, a lot of stuff like that. We met with the owner, actually the owner of this facility, Jim Sutton, and he was concerned about a number of things, and we got over all of that.
Okay, well, it sounds like it may change from what we're approving here anyhow, but.
So when we get to the conditions, you can express your desire to have that done as a, a comment, but we'll vote on the particulars.
Where are the garbage cans going?
There's a number of dumpster pads and facilities located, sort of dispersed throughout the site in areas.
It's all gonna be dumpsters.
All dumpsters, enclosed.
It's hard for me to see from 20 feet away.
Yeah.
But the first time we went through this, there was a lot of on-street parking. And I'm thinking all these apartments and people coming and going, where do the moving vans go with all the parking on the street? It doesn't seem like the streets are going to be wide enough
They'll
to
get
park the moving van and have all this diagonal parking.
They will get in, I can guarantee you. They get into much tighter places in urban areas, they will get in.
The fire marshal's already.
Fire marshals all over that, yep.
So how wide are these streets with the
They're-
parking on them?
Well, the two-way travel ways are between 20 and 24 feet. That's a normal road. And then you add the parking. The parking is in addition to that, not within that.
Okay, so the moving van is gonna have to park on the other side of the street from the parking. So now we have a one-pass street, right?
Maybe to the.
The moving
time
van's
that
not
moving
gonna
van's
pull
there.
into anybody's parking space.
Yeah, but the moving van will be there to the extent that he moves, unloads his furniture, and then he leaves. And there's bypass room.
So there's room for one car to get by.
It'd be no different if you had
No
something
different in a
delivered.
residential
Yeah, exactly
neighborhood
right.
for
The
that.
same thing as when FedEx comes to deliver something.
I mean, this has been very well vetted by a lot of people at various, along the way. Design review, fire marshal, all the rest.
I have a quick question about the memo, Hiram, regarding the workforce housing units.
Yes.
It says 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, I can explain that when we get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so what I thought we'd do is, let's get to any other questions, and then we can get to the stage of a motion. Recognizing, again, not trying to steamroll anything here, but there's been a lot of work done on a lot of this detail.
What's the approval process here? If we're going to approve something, just set of drawings, and then
And
they're
if they
gonna come
change,
back
if
and
they change it, they come back for a site plan amendment. Right?
Correct.
Just like they would,
Is
like
there,
they're doing today. This is our first site plan approval for the PAD, which was approved with very specific outlines of this project at the time that the PAD was done, but this is our first approval of the site plan.
And they can start construction based on this.
But it isn't a full PAD, it's just the residential part, right?
Well, no, we approved the full PAD, just, yeah, I'll
The site
help
plan's
attorney,
just-
yeah, Pearson, her litany. We have approved the zone change to PAD.
Right.
And that included.
But we're not seeing any of that in front.
What's that?
We're not seeing any of that in the front.
That's right.
All
because
we're
it's not-
doing today, so let's go back over
This
this.
is what
So
you
we're-
approved.
We approved the PAD,
Right?
and then the next step is to approve the site plan for the areas that are included in the PAD. So tonight, we are being asked to approve the site plan, from which then the construction can begin. And if there are changes to the site plan, just as if it were a single piece of property, and we had approved a site plan, they will come back for a site plan amendment, and we will look at it and say yes. And if it's substantive from a design point of view, it would have to go back. If it changed some of the sewer or water, then they'd have to go back. But that's not what we're doing tonight. Tonight, they've been through all of these gates, and we're being asked to say, as this first section of the PAD, we're approving this site plan as outlined.
For only this lot, Lot 1B.
On B, correct. Right. Nothing else is approved to begin to be built until they come back and ask for this first site plan approval for the other parcels in the PAD.
Right.
Okay? All right, so before I look for a motion, let's go through some of the items that were discussed in the memo, and you shared this with the applicant?
I did not, I just finished it this afternoon, but I discussed it all with them.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, before you start, could I put one more thing on as part of our presentation?
Sure.
Eli just wanted to make sure that it's quite clear that, again, if the state does not approve the bike trail connection at the end of the CLNP driveway, that will not preclude him from being able to secure his certificates of occupancy to proceed with his development. So we'll do everything we can to get it. I can't imagine, as Chris has said, why they wouldn't grant it, but just in case, if we can't produce it through no fault of our own, we can still proceed with our development.
I thought you said you owned the property.
No, we will purchase Lot 1B from Mr. Greenberg Infinity. So you've got two different parties here before you right now. So whereas the developer for Lot 1B, assuming we get site plan approval, we will then proceed to close on the property and secure the encroachment permits that we need and finalize the sewer connection permits and things like that.
All right. All right, so at the risk of being a little tedious, I think it'd be helpful to go through all of this, and I will read this.
Do you have another copy?
All right. So the commission finds the following, so these are discussion items that may or may not be included as we,
If we approve.
if we approve and make a motion. Commission is comfortable with the fact that the applicant has shown how the original approved building heights are met by this application. I suggest using some of the same graphics to explain this important point. So I believe that you attempted to do that tonight, that's fine. The commission understands and believes the applicant, current property owner, understands the status of the WPCA application regarding the sewer allocation for all portions of the site. Again, you addressed that this evening. The applicant understands and will consider using a gravity sewer system instead of the planned pump station, even though it's understood that a sewer line would have to be installed after proper permitting under the abutting state-owned trail, which abuts a subject property. Permitting will need to include the town of Avon, Simsbury, WPCA, and the state of Connecticut for this alternative. Again, you addressed that in your opening comments. The applicant has shown the commission a feasible and acceptable route of securing trail access for pedestrians and cyclists from DOT rail section. As previously noted, the trail will need to be installed and properly documented prior to issuance of any certificates of occupancy. To Attorney Pearson's point, we will discuss that. Detailed plan for the construction of this connection and proper documentation shall be provided prior to the request for issuance of any certificates of occupancy.
Just as a point of clarification, to council's point, I think we need to be careful about this language because we would have to secure access to that to provide a C of O, which I think you're saying is not the case.
She doesn't want that contingency
Well,
if DOT does not approve it.
Assuming it's
Contingent on the
approved.
encroachment permit.
Contingent
Right,
upon.
the DOT would.
Right, okay.
All right, next, draft cross easement documents as to what cross easements are proposed and the fact that they will be submitted for town attorney review and approval prior to signing the final site plan. So when we get ready to make a motion, I'm going to put these into words, Derek. Draft documents for the 18 workforce housing units. You've supplied those to us. Proposed method of monitoring them for compliance along with the documents themselves. Need to be in form and content satisfactory to the town attorney. Workforce housing units shall be deed restricted, and now, Hiram, you can explain the difference between 20 or 30 years.
I spoke with the town attorney, actually 5 minutes to 7 tonight, and he indicated that they are in fact reviewing that and will give the commission some recommendation and the applicant some recommendations on that, but just wanted to use that wording that the town attorney would approve them with regard to form and content as soon as he finishes a review.
So we'll have input on that or not?
He wanted the commission to know that that would happen, but doesn't need to happen before you
All
decide.
right, so we'll make provisions for that when we make our motion. Draft conservation easement documents for the proposed open space conservation easement area to be submitted and approved by town attorney. Commission hereby requires or does not require screening the townhouse garages from Hot Meadow Street as the future commercial buildings are not there. So you have said that you would do that in the form of the grass that is on
I would just like to add that, Mr. Chairman, that the applicant did give me a plan tonight, a plan dated 4/6/15, which shows that screening in place.
Okay, so number 9 is wait until future PAD development. The PAD property owner, Infinity 4, regarding the rear access way behind the NU building as the access way, driveway, roadway heads to the north from this side. So that's not part of the property that Garden Homes is purchasing.
Correct.
Is it?
Correct.
It's not. So we really are not in position to require or not require.
That's correct. I
As it
think that
relates to this.
the intent here was to just put everybody on notice that that was something that had been discussed from day one with regard to this process, but we certainly understand that it's not part of this application at the present time.
There's an expectation that that road will be built, but it's not going to be part of this specific
Correct.
approval. All right. Property owner hereby made aware of the possible need for a future traffic signal at the entrance drive. The entire signal analysis be left for a future date. And again, you mentioned that everyone continues to say at this stage it's not required, but that eventually could be.
It will be.
Will be, yeah. All right, so I think what we should do is go through these one at a time, and I think for ease, I'm gonna ask that, I'm gonna make the motion myself, and ask that Hiram draft an approval letter if the vote is affirmative, that will give you guys the details necessary so that you have actionable documentation, all right? So I would move approval of the application number 15-06 of Robin Messier Pearson for K&K Developers, Inc., agent, Infinity 4 LLC owners for a site plan amendment on property located at 34 Hot Meadow Street, Zone PAD, with the following conditions or expectations.
There's the lot in there.
What's
You got
that?
the lot in there, right?
What's
You
that?
had the lot 0.
I'm sorry, yeah, okay, so just for the record, you're gonna copy the application. Lot number, Assessor's Map E18, Block 117, Lot 001. And that is the specific Lot 1B, Attorney Pearson?
Correct.
Is that the correct reference to the
Correct.
lot?
And when this was first drafted, that lot didn't exist, so that's a proper reference at this time, because the subdivision has in fact been approved, and that's what's been shown.
Okay. So when we do this approval letter, we'll be sure we have all of the proper references just for this lot.
I believe that Lot B is within the lot that you cited. But-
Within the lot
but-
001?
That's correct, but 001 contains 14 plus 10, 25 acres, and Lot 1B is 14 and a half acres.
Okay? So we're not approving anything other than
1B.
1B. So Hiram, that's got to be clear.
Got it.
Okay. Let's spend just a minute on this. So say that again, Attorney Donahue?
The lot number
Lot.
that was recited includes the three lots that are shown on that map, but the approvals that you're approving today relate to 14 and a half acres, Lot 1B, which includes the driveway and the 14 acres, which are going to be the apartments.
All right. And are A and C the front two lots of one?
Yes.
All right, so we want to be crystal clear, that's why I asked the question again. We want to be crystal clear that we're really only approving 1B, which includes the area at the back of the property and the driveway, correct? All right.
I'd like to make one minor note, Mr. Chairman, as long as we're being very specific. The planning commission did make a note that on the subdivision map, there was a right to grade in favor of Lot 2B, and that note should have referred to Lot 1B. So that's just to be clear, that note was corrected during the planning commission process.
All right, so I'm just looking through the conditions here, hang on.
I just have one comment on 4. Again, I don't mean to be stuck on it, I just don't want there to be a Scrivener's issue. With regard to the second sentence, it says, as previously noted, the trail would need to be installed and properly documented prior to issuance of any certificates of occupancy, but not as a condition of approval or withholding the C of O. I just
All right,
want to
so-
be clear on
Yeah,
that.
I'm not there yet.
Oh, okay. When we get there.
I love it, man. All right, so this will include, what?
Bye.
So the motion's been made for approval with the following conditions, that the applicant acknowledges that they will use a gravity sewer system instead, or is that actually part of the application now? You're gonna tie in at the bottom,
We're going to tie in the bottom, predicated once again, similar to the
and that's
trail,
part of this site plan.
as part of this site plan.
Okay, so I don't need to mention it because it's in the site plan.
Well, it hasn't
No,
been
no, no,
shown
no,
on
no.
the site.
So what is in the site plan is the pump station that pumps up and out.
So that's what I'm saying. So I'm noting in our approval that you will switch from what is in the site plan that you submitted. We're altering what you submitted as the application to include the gravity feed.
They have to get
And
approval for
the
that, too.
clarity there
As a
is
replacement.
predicated on the
Approval of-
approve it.
Okay.
Why would we why would we not say, okay, come back when you got that ready to roll?
Well, they're telling us that that's,
It's a good idea.
But they need us in order to go to the next step.
yeah, we're gonna approve it tonight, and if they don't get the approval, then if you have to switch back to the pumping station, you have to come back. Or do you not want it that way?
May I suggest you could do it in the alternative, which simply says,
That's
we're
fine.
gonna do
Either
it this
way,
way,
yeah.
but if we can get the approvals we need, then
That's
we're
fine.
going to do
Yeah, we-
the
I'm okay,
smarter
we don't-
connection.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
All right? All right, so that we will allow for the approval of either the pumping station or the gravity feed sewer. So that's number one. The second condition is that to the extent that the applicant receives approval from the DOT for the rail trail connection to, from the Lot 1B to the rail trail, that prior to your certificates of occupancy, you will make that connection. Where's that effect? Is that satisfactory?
But only if the connection is authorized by the state.
Encroachment.
That's not the approval by the DOT?
That is the approval.
That is the
Okay, that's what I said.
Okay.
What type of connection are we envisioning?
It's just,
Chris,
there's some grade change between the end of that property where the trail is, so we're gonna have to sort of diagonally splay it off at 5% grade. so it's
Is the
accessible.
rail higher than the property?
No, the rail's
Lower?
lower. Rail's lower than the property.
In that spot.
So,
My kids, they don't get up and down it quite easily.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry,
It'll be an
we
8 foot
trespassing
wide
your property,
bituminous bike, it'll look a lot like the bike trail that we're connecting to.
So it'll be just dirt you're putting
So they're gonna make legal what you do every,
Be paved.
they're gonna make legal what you do, been doing all along.
I'm very in favor of it.
Okay, so,
Lots of
so
street.
Hiram, you have that wording then, that provided that the applicant receives DOT approval prior, that prior to getting their certificate of occupancy, they will connect the rail trail to, they'll connect their portion of the rail trail to the rail trail.
As shown in that plan.
What's that?
As shown in the plan.
As shown in the
Right.
plan.
And I have some scribbles, I'll get the exact wording from that later on.
All
I
right.
just want to be really clear too, perhaps the applicant could clarify this, is that originally there was proposal for the residents of the development to access the trail in another location. And with lots of discussion back and forth
Yeah.
about where this should go and so on. I assume that's still proposed?
No.
Okay, not at all?
Nope.
Okay, so as shown on the current plan, that is
Right.
exactly correct,
Right.
thank you, okay.
But there is the bike shed still there?
Yep.
That's on the plan, okay.
Yep, and it still works. The entire hook of this, marketing hook of this is bike friendly, and that works as well as that.
So they would just go down to
Yep.
the north.
Okay. All right, so the third is that it will be subject to all necessary easements between, wherever and however you need them. But he'll make it sound better than that.
I'd like to see a condition like
Just,
that, right?
and just so that, just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, on the second page of the package you have, the applicant has provided a list of probable future easements required in the location, so we'll incorporate that into the motion. I assume that that's complete. However, if there's anything else the town attorney points out to me that we need, we'll add that accordingly.
So then the fourth condition is that the workforce housing units will have documents in form and content satisfactory to town attorney with a minimum deed restriction of at least 20 years, and that way if he comes back with something more than that, we'll advise you, all right? So the conservation easement docs, that'd be part of the same easements as in number 3, I think.
Yes.
And do we need to mention the screening of the townhouse garages?
That's part of the plan now, because
It is part of the plan.
Well, it's being proposed as part of the plan. so-
Yeah, we submitted.
All right,
it
so
as an
we'll put
exhibit.
that in specifically, since you've offered to do it. And then I guess that, so those are the 5 conditions. One, the first is that the sewer system will either be the gravel lead or the pump. The second is that the rail trail will be connected as long as you get your approval. Third is that you will do all the necessary easements and form substance satisfactory to the town staff and attorney. For the workforce housing units will be documented in the form of substance satisfactory to the town attorney. And the fifth is that you will screen the townhouse garages from Hot Meadow Street. We'll put this in the form of, if approved, we'll put it in the form of an approval letter in which Hiram may actually add some of the other things that we have discussed, like the traffic signal, and those aren't, there's no action necessary now, but it's just, it will be part of the record as to what was discussed and approved. All right, so I've made a motion.
I'll second that.
And Mr. Gray seconds it. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just have one last question, Hiram, regarding the 20 or 30 years. What conversations are going on to determine what the number will be?
The town attorney, as I said, I spoke with him just before the meeting this evening, and he hadn't really gone through the document completely. The original letter of approval that the commission sent on this particular application talked about a 20-year restriction period, but it also mentioned the workforce housing overlay zone standards, which is a 30-year period. And the town attorney needs to give us guidance as to where we are on that whole thing. The applicant, have had this discussion with the applicant. Obviously, they would prefer the 20-year restriction period as opposed to the 30. And I just told the town attorney, just, give me your best advice on that, and didn't press it one way or the other.
But isn't that set by the state statute? We don't have any choice.
This is not. This is
to
a different animal in this particular. We chose not to go with state statute in regard to the 8-30G or those standards. So we put our own regulation in place, and that was the reference for that approval.
So why wouldn't we go with our regulation?
Not
Instead of
specific.
being one way or the other.
Yeah, well, that's what the town attorney's going to advise us on. I honestly didn't know.
This will end up being the regulation, probably.
May I add anything to that? It's just that when the PAD was approved, it was approved for 20 years. There is indeed for a restriction, this is basically a voluntary restriction. We didn't apply to you under your workforce housing regulation.
Right.
In fact, you may recall there was a fair amount of debate on this commission as to whether you'd even ask us to do the 18 units, but we had agreed to do it. And so we are just following through on the 20-year requirement you imposed initially on us. And I might add that I have been in touch with Mike Santoro at the State Department of Housing to make sure that you're going to get credit when these units are delivered with regard to, if any of you are familiar with it, the 8-30G 10% appeals list and the statutes and regulations that govern what's necessary for you to get the credit for those 18 units does not have a maximum or minimum requirement for how long that restriction is in place. The only thing I can say is you're only going to get credit for the duration of the 20 years that it is in place.
We're never gonna make the 10.
I appreciate those comments, and we did appreciate your willingness to do that at the time that we discussed it. So, do you have a proposal to the motion? So we have left this open-ended 20 or 30 years. What I said was the minimum of 20 years, and unless the town attorney has some overwhelming reason we can't approve it at 20 years, I think we should stick to the 20 years.
I
That would
agree.
be my recommendation.
I would agree.
Because
Thank
we
you.
appreciate that. All right, so that's the motion, and the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
Thank you very much.
And we'll, again, put together an approval letter for you, so.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. It's been an odyssey.
I think it was the traffic report that nailed it.
Yeah, it really was.
I'm constantly overshadowed by my colleagues.
Gonna bring it up.
Jesus Christ.
All right.
Nice to see you, Mark.
Thank you all. Agenda item 5, discussion of new and ongoing projects. Status of agreement for zoning regulation revisions. Hiram.
I spoke actually by email with Glenn Chalder from Planet Metrics and set up a meeting for this week with our staff to talk about some of the questions that Glenn had about the regulations. We've given him all the information that we have. It's in a form that we think he can work with. And we're talking about now about how the regulations should be set up and structured. For example, current regulations, and I'm mindful of the time. Current regulations are essentially set up so that they can stand alone from the town center, for example. They can stand alone from the Hartford regulations. Ultimately, we plan to probably have them stand alone from what will ultimately be the WETOG regulations. We may ultimately, my proposal for next year, the following year, would be to do the North Village as well. So our sense is that we'll probably have a set of sort of standard, sort of base regulations that we'll go by, and then these specific regulations would come into play when somebody had to develop in those particular areas. So we're trying to work through that now. Staff will be meeting probably on Friday morning to talk about that, get that back to Glenn, and we'll set up a meeting with the commission to talk about sort of where things are sometime in the near future. That date hasn't been set yet, but that's where we're at with that.
Okay. All right.
Anything else that's going on or not going on that people have?
Maybe we can share just a little bit with the Cumberland Farms property. There was some issues with the driveway, right, that was resolving themselves.
There was a DOT, took a look at the plan that the commission approved, and DOT wanted to change a driveway that was two-way in and out into one driveway in only. What that would have meant is that cars would have had to go through the entire site behind the gas pumps or in front of the gas pumps to the southern driveway to get back out again. I talked to the chief of police about that and also talked to the fire marshal. We all decided that that really was not productive, that if people are going to visit the building on the north, the old so-called pool barn building, that they would come in, if they might go to an office there, and then leave by the same driveway without crossing through the site, whether it would be conflict with somebody getting gas or running over a pedestrian that was going to the convenience store or whatever. So we wrote a letter the same day that the applicant had a meeting with DOT, and were able to convince DOT to leave the plan that the commission had approved in place. So that did in fact happen. They were very, very happy that the commission supported that, and we expect that to start actually in May this year.
Great. I saw a truck there today. I was excited.
Yeah.
They've dug a hole at Ethel Walker for the Centennial Center, so they are off and running there.
Cool.
That's right. It's ready to go.
Didn't take them long.
No, it's funny how the nonprofits really just.
Big Y?
You would expect to see, who? What? Big Y?
The big what?
The Big Wire?
No, they're big ones waiting on DOT.
Y is waiting on the approval from DOT for their traffic light, and that's all that's holding that up right now. So that's been.
Is the last thing holding it up?
They put a
That's
shovel.
been
Till
actually
the next
in
thing.
Till the next-
DOT's hands since, I believe,
Exactly.
October.
Yeah.
So we're waiting on that right now.
They want a second
Not
light?
quite the same size hole
Just
as
one at their
Ethel
entrance
Walker.
driveway.
Yeah.
The entrance driveway would serve that
Done
property,
before
and
they
then
put a
if you
shovel
recall
in.
correctly, the commission was pretty clear about saying that if the property to the south of the Big Y was developed, that that access would serve as an entrance to that property as well, not require another curb cut onto Hot Meadow. So they would both come out at that same light.
They don't want a signal where the trucks would come out then.
That would be actually the skating
Skating
center
center.
drive,
Yeah.
and there's no signal there, no. There's not the volume of traffic that would come out that drive that would be what's called a warrant for that light. And at about $70,000 to $100,000 a clip, there was no proposal to put a light there.
Yeah.
And the delivery restrictions will be such that you probably won't have that much traffic on time when
3
they
to
come
5
in
a.m.
anyway.
Yeah, any trucks that come out of that would probably be very early in the morning, as Jackie said, absolutely. So we're still hopeful that it'll move forward this year. I called them last week and asked for an answer. I did get an answer from their engineer. I didn't get an answer from Big Y, so.
Okay. All right. Great. So we're back here on the 20th, is it?
That's right.
All right.
So we should have a couple of potential rezones. You know, we looked at 80 Walker Road a while ago in
Yep.
regard to a rezone there. Kind of an interesting situation. We'll see if that actually comes true, and it should be actually probably even a little better than what we saw last time. So I'm hopeful that a lot of discussions back and forth as to how that would work. So we're excited about that.
Move we adjourn.
You're still working?
Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Go Badgers.
Call from the new potential